So we had some experience in this matter in the United States in the case of Center for Democracy and Technology v. Papert. This was a state law, not a federal law, a state law that required state ISPs to block Pennsylvania citizens' access to child pornography, to illegal child pornography. And the ISPs implemented this requirement by using IP filtering, which was, a feasible alternative for them at that period of time. This resulted in the blocking of over 1 million non-child pornography related sites. So they sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater because many websites, legal and illegal, share the same IP address. And the court, in looking at this, said, even though this is a fine and important state interest, compelling state interest to restrict child pornography, when implemented in this fashion, this renders the law unconstitutional. So it's important for us to have narrow tailoring of any speech restrictions. Finally, it's important to have, this is one of the First Amendment's requirements in order to have a valid prior restraint on speech, to have judicial review of any prior restraint and appealability of such a decision. Many countries like the UK, if they allow for any appeal at all, only allow for an appeal to the same non-judicial body that filtered in the first place. So the Internet Watch Foundation will take a second look at your challenge to their decision to filter, if you're even informed about the filtering decision in the first place, right? And again, we can talk about the leaky mails case. At least, in that case, at least we have judicial review of the decision and presumably of appealability of the decision. So judicial review and appealability necessary for having a valid constitutional prior restraint in the United States system. Now, questions about how to apply this to efforts to restrict minors' access to harmful internet content. And we have some experience with this in the United States. We have some laws that are constitutional and some laws that were found unconstitutional because the attempt to restrict minors' access spilled over to adults' access and was overly restrictive of adults' free speech rights. Finally, and I don't know how this applies in the context of your countries, but I think it's important in the United States context, in the UK context, for countries not to hide behind private entities voluntarily imposing nationwide filtering regimes to immunize the government from responsibility, right? So the UK response, I think, would be, look, this is just a voluntary initiative that the ISPs decided to undertake to work with this blacklisting group to check to make sure that they weren't hosting harmful content. And the UK government also said, if the ISPs don't agree to do this, we're going to pass a law requiring them to do it. So it's sort of a heavy stick there. If the idea is to encourage all of the country's ISPs to filter this speech or else, then I think that should properly be held to constitute state action, which for purposes of our First Amendment means that action is subject to, to strict scrutiny. So it's important that states should not be able to evade their obligations to protect their citizens' free speech rights by delegating the censorship function to private entities, to private ISPs. So just wrapping up, if governments are going to filter, and they shouldn't, I think, but if they're going to filter, they should adopt these strict procedural safeguards that grow out of things like the First Amendment, doctrines like the First Amendment, narrow, objective, definite standards, transparency, in the filtering so that internet users can, rise up if necessary, be informed of these censorship determinations and do something about them, and have the ability to appeal, to have prompt judicial review and appealability of filtering decisions. And then the narrow tailoring and narrowest implementation of any filtering or blocking orders that come from the court. And my only words in Spanish to you will be muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Excellent presentation, very challenging. We have time for a few questions and a few comments coming from the audience. Just a clarification to leave you thinking for a few questions, and I'd like to make a few comments and then a few questions, and then we'll pass the mic on so questions can come from the audience and we can make the most out of Dawn's knowledge. I can see a lot of students. It's a very interesting topic, and I can see it from your faces. Cele also proposes and offers internships, so you can see it from the folders. You can see how to carry out internships in our investigation center. Dawn, I have a few questions that I would like to make, and then we'll move on to the auditories or the audience's questions. One has to do with the regulation of intermediary liabilities or non-liabilities. I mean the 230. And the difference that you actually expressed with the European context. The specific question is, this strong difference, is it linked to a different conception of the contents of freedom of speech in the United States and in Europe? Could it be linked to this difference in concept? What is your opinion? And I would like to know is if currently the United States is debating the changes in 230, and what is your vision in this respect? And the other topic, which I found very interesting and very challenging, is when Dawn compared filtering with prior censorship. Dawn says filtering is a way of prior censorship. If this is so, the Latin American Human Rights Agreement, Article 13, our Supreme Court has a very strong sort of requirement of prior censorship. If we take these arguments to the extreme, we would think that it's impossible to have any sort of filtering mechanism in internet. And if these filtering mechanisms did exist, that ISPs put into place, the government of the states would have to.
Lo que me parece que es, digamos, llevar la cuestión a un extremo en el que no sé si todos estaríamos de acuerdo, pero tenemos que pensar cómo compatibilizamos la prohibición tan fuerte del artículo 13 sobre no censura previa con esta idea que filtrado es censura previa. Entonces, alguna reacción sobre eso. Y la última está vinculada al tema de censura previa y la actividad de los ISP. Creo que en el primer párrafo de tu libro, Don, hablas sobre el problema de la censura no tanto provocado por gobiernos, sino provocado por privados. Creo que empezás hablando sobre eso. Me gustaría saber tu visión en cuanto a cuál tendría que ser, si es que cabe alguna actitud por parte del Estado en cuanto a regular esas formas de filtrado, y si esta regulación que vos proponés para el Estado, estos 4 puntos que vos ponés sobre transparencia, que sea limitada, etcétera, etcétera, serían regulaciones que tendrían que obligar también mediante regulaciones a los privados, o eso dificultaría el trabajo, digamos, o la labor de los intermediarios.